Hello, I'm Tiffany, creator of Red Petal Patterns, and this is Intermediate Basics for Knitters. Today I want to talk about seaming garments, and I'm going to have several videos on this topic because it is very important and very detailed, and I want to make sure that it's understood. The first one was already covered in my Knitting Basics for Beginners video. I believe that's part 15, mattress stitch. And that is when you have a side seam and a side seam. So when you're making garments, and even in knitting, these are referred to as seams. You do not sew up your sweater pieces. You seam them, meaning you are creating a seam and finishing them, and it's in your finishing work. And this is an edge to an edge. So this would be if you had a front and a back and you wanted to stitch them together at the underarm, at the side seam. You can also have a sleeve. So you have a sleeve that was worked flat and then sewn together. One method for dealing with seams would be, with sleeves, of sewing a sleeve, would be to not sew the side seam and the sleeve seam. You would go ahead and you would sew at the shoulders, you would lay it out flat, your front, your back would be laid out flat, and your sleeve would be laid out flat, and at that point where the cap of the sleeve comes out to the underarm, you would take that point and match it up to the end of the underarm on your sweater. And then you would sew this in, or seam it, and then you would fold the whole thing up so that you could seam up the sleeve seam and the side seam at the same time. And that looks like this. So if you imagine that this is your front and back, that's the shoulder, it's already seamed up, and you have a curve here where the underarm sits, so that's the shoulder and that's the armpit there. And then you take your sleeve, which has a curve where the cap is, and then a straight spot where the underarm is, and you would slide it right in there and make this seam flat, and then you would fold everything up like this and make one solid seam all the way from the end of the sleeve up to the armpit, and then from the hem up to the armpit. Or you can go the other way around, from the armpit to the seam. Do not go from the cuff to the hem. You want to start and end, and then start and end. And you can start at the armpit and go down. You can start at the ends and go down. I suggest starting at the ends and going to the armpit, so that if you are off, you don't have uneven ends. So if you were ever so slightly off, you wouldn't want your hem to not match up. You want your hem to match up, and any mistakes be hidden in the underarm section. So, as I said before, I already covered the straight seams side by side, the edges, the edge to edge. So the knitting is going this way on both pieces, but sometimes you have, like on the shoulders of a sweater, instead of running side by side like this and you join them together side by side, they're going to be running this way. So this is knitted up this way, this is knitted up this way. The way you can tell is that if you take your knitting and you pull on it, there's ladders and V's. or loops. The loops are where your actual stitches were. There we go. So there's my ladders and there's my loops. And if you follow your loops, this is knitted, this is on top and this is on bottom. So my loops run this way, like this. You can, or your loops would run this way, like this, if this was your top. Okay, that's how you can tell what direction they're running. If you have two pieces of sweater that were both knitted either from the top down or the bottom up, you're going to have your V's, and these are loops. So if you were to follow one little stitch, it would go behind this stitch and back around and into this stitch. Same with this one. It'll go behind this stitch and back behind this one. And this one comes out of the center of this one. This one comes out of the center of this one. And it'll do that. You won't have that connection in between the columns. So it's very, very important that you find the columns, because obviously you can't do this when you put your sweater together. See how that makes little eyeballs all the way across? And you can't just stick them together and sew them, because you will have eyeballs or no eyeballs, but you'll also have a little seam running there. And it will be obvious that it was stitched together. Store-bought sweaters have that little, it's called a ditch. It will have just this little ditch there, and it's there forever. It will always be there. It's a seam. If you want it to be seamless, you have to match up these loops. So where this loop starts here and goes around and behind and back down, and this loop starts here, goes around behind this one and back down again. And you need to match those up so that when you run your needle, you are going to maintain that direction. So your stitch would go behind this one, and then behind this one, and then behind this one, or behind this one, and then behind this one, so that it makes that zigzag that it made the last time that we showed the mattress stitch. Yes. You want it to maintain that zigzag, and when it maintains that zigzag, you want it to maintain its loop. This will make more sense in a second. If you don't maintain that loop, you're just going to get a ditch instead of an undetectable piece of work. So I've used a different color thread so that you can see what I did. So these stitches start here, go around, and come back to here. So when my seaming thread went in, it had to mimic that stitch. So all of these stitches are the same. You can see this comes out of the same point, goes behind the stitch, and back down to the same point. So that makes a complete stitch. It gets blurrier as I bring it closer. But you can see that this comes out here, goes behind the stitch above it, and then back down again. So it looks just like all these others. See, it comes out here, goes behind this stitch, comes back down, and goes back in the same hole. That's what this stitch does. If I turn it around, you'll see that this stitch comes up from the bottom around the back of that stitch and back down to that one, just like this one. It comes up, goes around and comes back down. So when you line your pieces up, you want to get as close as you can to the bottom, and you want to start just like you did in mattress stitch, counting the 2 bars. You want to start with your first stitch and pay attention to what direction it's going. Put your needle behind that first row, that first stitch in that first row. Put it behind there, come out. Then you want to go down to the other side, same direction, and go behind the stitch and come out. And then you'll go behind the next stitch, come out, behind the next stitch, come out, behind the next stitch, come out, behind the next stitch, come out. So you're still going in that zigzag and in the same direction like you did for the mattress stitch. Only this time, instead of going around 2 bars, you're going around 2 legs of your stitch. So if you imagined when you did it this way, you went around 2 bars beside the stitch. This way, you're going around the back of the stitch. So you're making another stitch. And when you come around this way, you're going to do the same thing. And the stitches end up being just offset, 1 leg from each other. But you always go the same direction. So you will go through this one, then you go back up and go through this one, and you go through this one, and you go back up and go through this one in that same alternating zigzag, except you're going around the back of the stitch, and you want to try to stay in the same row across instead of the same column. You want to stay in the same row going all the way across. When you get done with that, just like in the mattress stitch, you'll be able to pull this. Oh, by the way, this is also done face up because otherwise you can't see those stitches. And when you get done, you'll be able to pull this, and you will have, pull that too tight, you will have a flat seam that doesn't have the ditch in it. Your stitches will line up. There we go, you can see the stitches. See, that makes 1 continuous column all the way up. I did too many stitches in a row before pulling it. Just like in the mattress stitch, you really only want to do 5 or 6 stitches and then pull it. And then 5 or 6 stitches and then pull it. But you can see where that ends up making 1 continuous column. And that makes 1 continuous column, all the stitches going the same direction. If you don't get that one perfect, it's okay. The worst thing will happen is you'll have that ditch there. But it's really special when you can make that continuous column, because you're looking at it and it's all flat and it's perfect, and it doesn't look like you did anything at all there. Let's see if I can. But everywhere that it's pulled, it makes 1 continuous column going all the way across that bridge, and you don't have that ditch where it doesn't line up. And that is how you seam up. Instead of edge to edge, you're seaming up end to end, and that's how you do an invisible seam. And I hope you like and share this with other people, because I don't want to be a secret. And I will see you next time. Bye.